Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on career paths in audio mixing with Leslie Ann Jones and Michelle Sabolchick Pettinato. My name is Mallory Misnarsik and I'm the project manager here at Harman. A few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenters and they'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'll pass it over to Raul to introduce you to Leslie and Michelle.
Hello and welcome to today's session. My name is Raul Gonzalez and I'm one of the Senior Applications Engineers at Harman Professional. Today's session is a very, very special session, and we are hoping that you will stay with us for the next 90 minutes to examine the amazing careers of two iconic figures of our audio industry. I would first like to introduce the iconic Leslie Ann Jones, with a 40-plus years career in our audio industry. She's the current director of music recording and scoring at Skywalker Sound. She has won 5 Grammys in her career. She's one of the famous lecturers at the Audio Engineering Society Heiser Lecture Series. And she was recently inducted into the NAMTech Hall of Fame. So please make welcome one of my professional idols, Leslie Ann Jones. Hello, Leslie, how are you?
Good morning, Raul. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Michelle Sabolchick Pettinato, our partner in crime, glove-trotting trailblazer, front of house engineer to the stars. She's currently mixing Elvis Costello. Her resume of bands that she has been mixing over the last 30 years is the who's who of bands we all want to mix. Spin Doctors, Mr. Big, the Goo Goo Dolls, Melissa Etheridge, Big Time, Rush, Gwen Stefani, Fuel, Jewel, Lucius Jackson, Janet Jackson for that matter, right? And a long stint with the Indigo Girls. She was inducted into the Full Sail University Hall of Fame in 2015 and is one of the co-founders of soundgirls.org. So welcome, Michelle. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. And before, I'm going to stop sharing the screen real quick. Before we get going, dig into this next 90 minutes, I would just wanted to say, how are you? And to both of you, how are things at home? Leslie, you're in the West Coast in California, and Michelle, you are, I think, in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So how are things for both of you? How are you doing through this COVID thing?
As good as can be, I guess.
Hanging in there.
Hanging in there, yeah.
Good. Are you back to the studio, Leslie, or are you still in
I will be next month.
I see.
Yeah, it's been a long haul between the county and the state in terms of what everybody has to go through here to get approval. And
sure.
So, we're going to start small with a couple of musicians and see how it goes.
Excellent. Well, good. I'm glad that everybody's doing well. Everybody's staying healthy. And, we're looking forward to spending the next 90 minutes where we can briefly touch up on your careers. And actually, our goal is to help inspire those listeners to maybe get some tidbits about how you got to where you are, and maybe they can use that along their path to actually move their careers along. For those of you who are listening and watching, I recommend you stay on gallery view. Different from a PowerPoint session, we will have a series of questions for Michelle and Leslie, but we will spend most of our time basically having a conversation about their careers. And so let us get started. Let me get back to our questions here, and we'll go from there. All right. Let's see. So let's talk about career choices for a little bit. And the question that I find that everybody wants to ask you, is how did you get here? I think we all look up to you guys and we go, how did they get there? What path did they take to get there? Because maybe I can go along that path and actually get there myself. So it will be impossible to cover, your entire career in this next 90 minutes. Both of you can look them up on the web. They both have a lot of articles about them on the web. So I encourage you to do that. But I would like us to start talking about, how did you get here? And when did you realize that you wanted to work in audio? And different from that, when did you realize that you could actually make a living working as an audio engineer? And then we'll talk a little bit about, who or what helped you along the way. So how do we start? How did you get here? Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I was just laughing at the picture you showed in the Q&A, because sometimes I mentally add a little, what do they call those sort of text clouds, going,
sure.
What the hell is that sound?
What is she thinking about?
I have that look at the console, like, where's that coming from?
I had a lot of fun getting all those pictures put together, and we'll see a lot of them as we go through this. I was wondering, I wonder what Leslie's thinking right now.
I'm always thinking about something.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that I'm sure Michelle and I can agree about is our job has us multitasking at an incredible pace constantly. But how did I get here? Well, hard work, asking a lot of questions.
Yes.
Wanting to learn as much as I can. Not thinking I could do everything myself. When I started, it was really wanting. I never thought I would be a professional recording engineer. I wanted to be a record producer and an artist manager.
Sure.
I admired people like Peter Asher, who managed and produced Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor and people like that. And I thought, well, that would be a great right brain, left brain gig, because then you could produce a record and then actually
sure.
The artist.
And even before that, you had a band. You were in a band, I think, called Canticle, and you had your guitar and you had your own PA system, after your band disbanded. So it's interesting, it's like there was some musical influence, obviously your parents were influential in that, but you had your own guitar at 14, you were on a band. And then you had your own PA system with some friends. I think over your career, you spent a lot of time going up and down the California coast from LA to San Francisco and back to LA and then back to Northern California. It's interesting to actually follow your trajectory. That time that you spent at ABC Studios in LA, when you were originally, considering going to be a record producer manager, you also tell us about how you also decided to get into engineering, because you actually started doing engineering work at ABC.
Yeah, ABC Records had a recording studio, and I went and asked for a job, and couldn't start right away because I was scheduled to do a European tour as a road manager for an all-female rock group called Fanny. That many people
very famous.
And I ended up mixing sound for them on that tour, and then came back and started at ABC, and that was kind of it. I never looked back.
It's interesting because you were at ABC for a number of years, and then of course you moved from there to the very famous Automat, in San Francisco. And I was kind of curious because you had started mixing live bands, but you then migrated more to record production and record engineering. So I was always wondering what would have happened if Leslie stayed mixing live concerts. We probably had a lot better sounding live concerts, but I wonder about that. And so you made a career choice. You made a change in direction, and you said, I want to stay in the studio and work in the studio rather than probably slugging this PA around. Yeah,
and it wasn't so much the work of doing live sound. that ended up just being a kind of on the trajectory to, getting me into studio work. But the kind of the skills I learned doing live sound, having to get a balance right away, having to mix things quickly and get set up because you only get one shot at it.
Mm-hmm.
And these are, this is not like a tour with one artist who has the same rep every night. These are
Sure.
different bands that I was doing. But those skills have stayed with me my whole career and, have, I think, allowed me to be able to work very quickly.
You spent quite a bit of time at Automat in San Francisco. And for those who are listening who are not familiar with Automat, in the Bay Area, this was one of the most important recording studios for artists like Santana, Journey, Grateful Dead, Huey Lewis and the News, and so forth. And you worked there for a number of years and worked on a number of records. I'm curious, how was it to work on things like Santana's The Swing of Delight in 1980, or to do things like mix the music for The Apocalypse Now, in 79. I mean, these were seminal, for me anyway. I think for a lot of audio geeks like us, we kind of wonder, it's like, well, was it to work on those projects, at that time?
Well, it was a very interesting time. It's why I love living in the Bay Area so much, because you had something. The Automat was owned by David Rubinson, who took over the old CBS studios in San Francisco.
Right.
And I had heard a lot about CBS studios from Roy Halley, a very famous engineer who was one of my mentors when I was at ABC Studios. And, so we had one of the largest recording rooms in the Bay Area. And I got the opportunity to work with so many artists, including a lot of R&B artists, Confunction, Maze, of course, Herbie Hancock. Apocalypse Now was something that David Rubinson was producing the music for. And that every studio in the Bay Area just about was working on that film. And that was a wonderful experience getting to work with David. And the Swing of Delight was sort of Carlos's jazz thing with Tony Williams on drums and Ron Carter on bass.
It's quite the ensemble.
Sorry? Yeah.
An amazing ensemble.
And it was the first digital multi-track recording done in San Francisco. So it was my first experience with digital recording.
I think that would all come in very handy as you move to Capitol Records. You spent a number of years working at Capitol Records and doing some very amazing recording sessions. I think you spent a lot of time working at Studio C, probably, in Capitol Records. What was it working there? I mean, this is back to Los Angeles, so now you started at ABC in LA, went to San Francisco, now back to Los Angeles to Capitol Records for a number of years. You are originally, I think, from Los Angeles, so is it like coming back home sort of thing? Yeah.
Well, I got the offer to work at Capitol, and I was in the Bay Area. The Automat had closed, and I was an independent for a couple of years and decided I really didn't like that. I've really enjoyed being on staff at places, and so I got the offer to go back to LA and work at Capitol, and it was a fantastic experience.
One of the topics we're going to cover on the next session is talking about self-learning. But one of the interesting things is that during your time at Capitol Records, you expanded, because up to this time you had been doing a lot of music records, and then when you work at Capitol, you actually expanded your repertoire of work and you started doing a lot of music for TV and film. And so I was kind of curious, you had already mixed the music for Apocalypse Now. What motivated you to actually expand, your scope of work to actually start doing more, scoring, recording for TV and for film?
Well, I think what motivates one is survival. And You know,
Mhm.
Capitol had recently redone their Studio A and Studio B, and it became a top choice for small scoring sessions
Mhm.
for film and TV. And, you know, that's just a different world. The terminology is different. The way the sessions run are different. And so I found if I wanted to work on those sessions and be good at what I was doing, that I had to learn what that was. You know, so fortunately,
Sure.
there was somebody who was teaching an extension class at UCLA on film sound from beginning to end, Victoria Sampson.
Vicky, yeah, Vicky Rose,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, wonderful sound editor. And so I took that course. And it was immensely helpful in terms of being able to speak the same language as the people coming in.
Mhm.
Because, you know, it's just different. Everybody's reading music. It's not verse, chorus, bridge. It's, you know, letter A. It's, you know, it's sync, lots of time code stuff, and I was familiar with that because by then we were locking up a lot of machines and doing digital to analog transfers and things like that.
A lot of synchronization and learning about synchronization was very critical at that point in time. Absolutely.
But
And it
it was
was also the first time you got exposed to the Neve 88R, which later, when you went to Skywalker, became you know, a nice tool that you already kind of, you know,
no, we didn't have an 88R at
that
Capitol.
wasn't
They,
until they have
they,
it now, right?
they got theirs long after we did at,
So you probably got yours first at Skywalker.
yeah.
That's nice. What was your console at Capitol at that point in time? I'm curious.
All Neves.
All Neves.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but
Very
it was
nice.
the Neve VXS, I think, in one room, and a VR and a
Nice.
8068, I believe.
And from there, after doing all those records, and you know, you then moved and doing all that work, you know, scoring. You moved to Skywalker in '97, where you have been the director of scoring, you know, stage for all of these years, and you're still working at Skywalker, and you're still loving it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. We're gonna have to talk more about that and your time and the technology that it's in, you know, in use at Skywalker Sound these days. So let me chat a little minute with Michelle. Michelle, your career is just mind-boggling. It's just the number of artists, the list of artists that you have worked with over the years is just amazing, stellar. And it's interesting to me that, you know, I think that one of the most interesting things to me is your early desire to get into audio. And I don't know if you want to go back to when you started playing piano at an age of 5, or maybe through high school when you already sort of knew that you wanted to work in audio. But how did that come about?
Yeah, well, I think it started with a really deep desire to be part of music. Like, music was always a part of my life when I was a kid. You know, just the radio was always on. We had a really eclectic record collection at my house, and I was always listening to everything from, you know, Kiss to ABBA to Johnny Cash to Herb Alpert, and a lot of classical as well, because I started taking piano lessons when I was young. And I think it came to, I remember, you know, I have a young memory of listening to Queen's 2 albums, A Day at the Races and A Night at the Opera, just laying in bed with my headphones on, listening to those records when they came out, and just being amazed at what I was hearing. And you know, I didn't know anything about the recording process, but I just would lay there every night and be like, how did they do this? And I used to, at that time, you know, it was vinyl, and I would read the liner notes of every single record. You know, I'd memorize everything on each album. And the one thing I noticed that every record had was this thing called a recording engineer. And I didn't know what that was, but I figured they must be important. So I think it was in high school, maybe like junior high, when it came time to figure out what you want to do with your life. I I didn't want to be a musician. I mean, I didn't want to be a performer because I really didn't want to be on stage and in the spotlight. So
Even though by that time you already played piano and you had been playing piano for a number of years.
yeah, I had been playing piano, and I played for the church choir, the school chorus. I played for friends and vocal competitions and talent shows. But I was always like begging them, can I just play backstage? And, you can be on stage and I'll be behind the curtains. I was, I had terrible stage fright. So I did not like being in the spotlight. So it was one of those things that it just kind of clicked for me. It's like, well, how can I be creatively involved with music, but not be a musician? And I looked into what does a recording engineer do? And that was it. I decided that's what I was going to that's what I wanted to do with my life. That was my path. And I grew up in a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. So I had no one in my family that was musical or even remotely involved in the business.
So you had lots of role models everywhere.
Yeah. There was no music business where I lived. There was, no live scene, no studios, nothing. So I figured, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to get an education in it. And
sure.
I first went to college for a year and to major in music, and I had one music course, and I realized this is not going to teach me what I need to know. So then after that, I went to the recording workshop in Chillicothe, Ohio, which was like a month-long program in basic recording arts. And from there, I got a job at a little radio station that had just started, and worked there for a few months.
So WMGH, what were you doing at WMGH?
Well, I went in and right after I graduated from the recording workshop, and I said, I want to make commercials. And they said, okay, great, but you got to sell them first. So I was basically doing selling radio advertising.
Hey, Michelle, I just got a quick note that your preamp kind of went down a little bit. If you want to turn up, that'd be great.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So I worked there for a while, and then I went to Nashville to try and get a job. I took a bus to Nashville. I had a cousin.
Wait. You went to Nashville to try to get a job, but you had only been at the, radio station for a little bit, and you had only had like a 6-month class. So your resume.
Not even 6 months. It was about 3 weeks.
your resume was probably not very long.
It had 2 lines. It had the recording workshop and WMGH. Yeah.
Okay.
But I had balls.
Yes, definitely. A lot of tenacity.
Yeah. So I went to Nashville, and I spent 3 weeks walking around Music Row, knocking on every single door I could find and handing out my resume and asking for a job. And I quickly realized I still had no idea what I was doing and how to get into the business. So I went back home, and I heard about Full Sail, and I enrolled there.
Okay.
And it was when I was in Full Sail that I actually switched, because originally I wanted to be a recording engineer, and then in Full Sail I had a live sound class, and it never even occurred to me, wait, you can do this and travel? So I switched gears and decided that I wanted to go on the road. And
this is like your ticket out of a small town.
Yeah.
and so, but at that point in time, remind me, Full Sail, this is 1989, I think.
Yeah.
Not a lot of classes in live sound, right?
No, just one. It was a 9-month program. It wasn't even a university at that point. It was just recording arts, and you had 9 months of classes, and it was basic recording, advanced recording, MIDI,
right.
Music business, synclavier, which actually, ironically, our project in our synclavier class was editing Apocalypse Now.
You see, I told you, this is 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
We're all connected.
Yeah. But
it
was just one class in live sound that, kind of encompassed everything. So.
And then, from there, obviously you did your internships, you did some work with that. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you took jobs with, little PA companies outside Philadelphia to do the gigs that nobody wanted to do. Load the van, go do the gig, fix the gear, mix the gig, put it back in the van, take it back to the shop, unload the van. That's where you hone your skills, to actually mix things that you have never mixed and troubleshoot gear and so forth. You also spent time, of course, tell us about your first tour, 1992 with the Spin Doctors. How was that? Both great fun, but also seems a little chaotic.
It was amazing. I mean, I had been moving back and forth between Pennsylvania and Florida since graduating Full Sail just to keep working. Like I took every job I could in audio, and I I was back in Pennsylvania and I wasn't making enough money to survive. So I was about ready to move back to Florida. And the day I was supposed to leave, something happened that it got delayed. And that afternoon I got a call from a friend of mine who asked me if I wanted to take over this gig because he wanted to get off the road, and they were coming through my area. So it was a classmate that became friends with me in Full Sail. And so I had never heard of the band, and he said, well, we're going to be in your area in a couple days. Just jump on the bus and you have 2 weeks. If they like you, great, you stay and I'll leave. And if they don't like you, we'll be back in your area. So you can just get off the bus and go
So
home.
you had never even you didn't know the band, you didn't know their music, but you said,
No.
sure, I'm going to go and figure out how to mix that.
Yeah, they sent me the cassette, and I was like, oh, this is really good. And I went out and he mixed the first show, and just to kind of give me a overview of what they sound like. And then I mixed the second show, and the third show we were on the Horde tour, which at the time was
Wow.
Blues Traveler, Bella Fleck, Aquarium Rescue Unit, Spin Doctors, and we were something like fourth band on the main stage. So basically we had a 20-minute changeover to get all our gear on stage, line checked, and go. So that no sound checks, no nothing, no digital
And mind you,
consoles.
no digital console, no recall. So you were just spinning knobs very fast, dialing up mixes on the go. I'm thinking of Leslie doing her live gig back in Los Angeles back in those days with your PA. I think that had to be a lot of dialing knobs in a hurry. There is no sound check. There is no recall like we have today. It had to be a little, when I say chaotic, in the fact that in less than 2 years, you went from doing clubs and small venues to, opening for Rolling Stones Voodoo Lounge Tour. That's a big audience.
Yeah, well, it was a little bit more than 2 years. I think it was probably, well, I mean, I started with Spin Doctors in 92, and then 94, we were on tour with the Stones in the biggest stadiums in the world. And it was a little intimidating, but, I hung in there.
the PA's got a little bigger, the audience got a little bigger, but the knobs were still the same.
Yeah, exactly. And the good thing about the Horde tour, it was kind of trial by fire, like that right there, spending several months on that really helped me to hone my mixing skills and helped me learn how to pull a mix together really fast. Because, we only had a 20-minute set, so you couldn't take 15 of them to make a mix. You had to get it in the first song. So that, really helped.
Your whole set was 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's something, right? It's like, I've seen people working on a kick drum for 20 minutes. That's it's like, hello, let's move on. That wouldn't work at the Grammys, right, Leslie? Probably not. So that's amazing, because from there, one of the most interesting things to me about your career, and we'll talk about this when we get into the mixing section, is how many different artists you have worked for with different styles of music. You have mixed every genre that I can think of that's out there. It's interesting, and we'll talk about that when we get into how you approach your mixing techniques. But that's one of the most interesting things, for me, about your career, over the last 28 years, how you have actually gone through different artists and worked for different artists and bringing your magnificent ear to their shows. And they're all different styles of music, and now mixing Elvis Costello, it's gotta be a joy to come to one of these shows, given that, his music has so many different styles, in the same concert. So I think that I'm looking forward to talking about that. Let me ask a question specific as to, people that have significantly helped or influenced you through this process, and specific to Leslie. You mentioned a name a minute ago that I researched a little bit on, Roy Halley. I think Mr. Halley was probably very detail-oriented, right? Would you say that? What things did he sort of instill in you?
Yeah, I think it would be an understatement to say that Roy was detail-oriented. But that is something that, again, has stayed with me my whole career. And I often compare it to a term in cooking called mise en place, where you get all your ingredients ready before you're ready to cook, so that you don't have to wait for anything, and that everything is right there in front of you, and all you have to do is just reach for it and add it. And Roy really taught me that. He never used that term, but that's really what it was. Make sure everything is checked out before you start your project. He was very particular about reverb, about how it was set, about making sure it was even, about checking all of that out, so that when the session started, he could just go to work and be creative.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how I've run my sessions ever since. I just want to go to work. I want to
Sure.
know that everything's been checked out. I mean, it's one of the things we do at Skywalker. We take time to set up, and many times there's a whole day beforehand if it's a large orchestra, and everybody goes home knowing that everything works. And you can just come in and start your date and be creative, and you're not fighting against things that aren't working. So that was a really important lesson to me.
Sure.
And a good foundation that I would recommend to everybody. Even now, it doesn't matter whether it's digital or analog, whether you're using patch cords or not, it's still important to make sure everything's working.
Phenomenal. Yeah, that work ethic, I think that apparently he brought to the sessions was something that inspired a lot of people, and it makes you actually become a better engineer, and actually probably opens this, the sessions to be more creative or more, I guess, relaxed and successful, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of
you're
the
not figuring out why something is not working.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
Michelle, I'm curious. Your first tour, our good friend Mark Johnson from Fidelity Sound Reinforcement in Virginia Beach is probably listening right now. Yeah, I told him to send you lots of questions. You took your time, and when you continue to go back and collaborate with Mark. I'm kind of curious what kind of things did you learn from collaborating when you're not doing a big tour, when you went back, and how did that influence the work that you then went to do on tour? What was the kind of influence that he had on you and your work style, and allowing you the chance to go through gear and prep things and work on mixes and whatnot?
Well, Mark owns a sound company in Virginia Beach, and when I started working for Spin Doctors, we did a ton of shows in that area, and he was always the audio provider. And when we were getting ready to take our first production on tour, it was Mark provided sound for the our tour in like early '93, and at that point he basically told me if I ever needed work to look him up. So as so happened, several months later, the tour ended and I had a couple months to fill, and Mark gave me a job, put me to work. And the biggest thing I got from Mark was his incredible positive attitude. Mark had this, we can do it, whatever you need, always just yes, 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 never negative, never miserable, just get the job done, whatever it takes. And that was, a great example to set, because there's a lot of people in this business that can be really miserable and negative and no. And Mark was the opposite of that. So he really, his work ethic really imprinted on me. And it was just, it was me and him and one other guy, and we'd take out a semi full of gear and set everything up, and I'd tech front of house, he'd do monitors, and we just did whatever we needed to do. But it was great to just sit on the other side of that, from mixing, to just be able to sit back and watch other engineers come through and mix gigs as well. And,
I had the pleasure to visit Mark. He's one of our VTX owners. And to me, it's simply the fact that he's a fun guy to be with.
Oh, he's great,
it's just a great fun guy to be with. And you're working, but you're having fun. So it just makes it a lot more enjoyable. I find that whenever we're working hard with somebody, but it's a fun time, it just makes it all more enjoyable. I think that you learn more. I think that the work goes by easy. And Mark is a live example of that. And I'm glad that we have him as a client. And I'm glad that, you started your touring career, with him. So that's a nice thing.
He's really great.
So let's talk about, how do you go about learning? Let me put up these questions for the audience. Real quick. Okay. Mastering the soon sharing button, right? It's one of those things. Okay, let's go to share. And here you go. So career choices, we talked about that. So I'm curious about how do you go about learning, your trade and some of the gear. Nowadays, and for a lot of the listeners, we things move very fast. Especially now that we're all home for the most part, there is many sessions on the web to learn about something, YouTube channels. How did you go, about learning your trade and learning a lot of the gear that you were using and putting up these two pictures, particularly going back. There you go, one more. So, in this picture, Leslie, you're here at the Neve 88R that it's at Skywalker, and I found this picture of Michelle and actually cropped this picture of you. This is when you were mixing Indigo Girls, I think, probably late 90s. And what people don't know on this picture is that there's another console, an L shape to your ATI Paragon, because you needed more inputs. There's another Harrison console actually sideways to you that is not in the picture. So I'm always curious to ask, how did you go about learning, and then, how do you stay current? Because there's so many technological advances and changes. How do you allocate time to learn something that you feel you have to learn? How do you stay current on things?
Well, for me, it just comes back down to the fundamentals, knowing signal flow, knowing gain structure. When you know that, gain is gain, EQ is EQ. It's just maybe in a different place on whatever console you're using. But once you understand all of that, it's all the same. The Paragon, I had gone from, I think prior to that, I was mixing on a Soundcraft 8000B for a while, then the Soundcraft Series 4. And I think it was actually Mark Johnson that got me on the Paragon because his friend, John McBride, was using one, I believe.
Sure.
And he was telling me how great they sounded.
Yeah, I think John had his out with Martina, actually, yeah. I think probably till last year, I think. But at that point in time, there were, late 90s, there were very few, original Paragons out on the road. So it's like, it's kind of like a spaceship, it's like a gigantic, very imposing. It had dynamics already in the
gates
console.
And comps on every channel, yeah.
It's like that. People were like, okay, not only that, but the mix buses that you have in it, the way things are organized is a little different from your standard Soundcraft architecture or some other consoles of the era. So I was kind of curious as to, okay, well, how did you go about figuring out this console?
It's just, like I said, it's the signal flow and basics. I mean, you're still, you're routing an input to an output. It's just a matter of where it is on that particular desk. And the reason I went with it was because it sounded amazing, and mixing Indigo Girls, it had a nice big fat warm sound, which really complemented their music. So that's kind of why I chose it. And for me, because I spend so much time on tour and you never have enough rehearsal time. I don't have a studio at home or anything. So I kind of learn things as I need to. If I know I need to learn a new desk or a new piece of gear, it'll be like a crash course, prior to using it. It doesn't do me any good personally to, okay, I'm going to go and take a class to learn this, and I'm not going to use it for 6 months because by the time I get around to using it, I'll have forgotten. So I tend to do better as like crash course right before I'm going to use something. And I also usually stick to what I like and what I know until I have something where I need to solve an issue or I need to change something. Because I don't have the time to invest, between, work schedules. There's just not enough time to invest in a lot of outside learning other than what I absolutely need to do.
Sure. And yet, you have gone through many different platforms and consoles. You obviously spent a lot of times on Midas XL4s. You're using Midas Pro Series now, digital consoles. You've also, you mixed Janet Jackson on a Digico, which was serious crash course. How all of that obviously requires a particular desire to actually push yourself out there and decide to learn something. You could have said, no, I'm not going to do that project because I have to learn
right
something else. I'm like, if I don't take my console, I'm not doing that. and you say, well,
Right.
I'm going to learn that console so I can do that project, you know?
Yeah, well, for example, Janet Jackson, that came up last year. I got hired very last minute to do a few shows with her, and there were no Midas desks available, and they already had a Digico SD7 in the truck on the way to the gig. So I was like, all right, well, I've used Digicos on one-offs, I've mixed on them, but I don't know their menu and file structure. So I basically sat down with, I had the online tutorial, the manual, and an offline editor on my desk, all the same time for about 48 hours, just diving in and figuring out the console, setting up my workflow, designing and laying out the desk the way I needed to do it before I got on the plane to fly out and do the gig. But yeah, like I'm not one for just let's walk in and
Right.
figure it out. Like if I know like I'm flying out to do a one-off on a desk I haven't used before, or maybe not for a few months, I'll just take the manual and, review real quick what it is I need to know to get done and get what I need from that desk.
Yeah, phenomenal. And we'll talk a little bit more about PAs and, staying current with different PA technologies and so forth. Leslie, you have gone through, multiple recording studios, ABC, the Automat, Capitol, and now at Skywalker. Have seen multi-tracks come and go from your Tascam 10, back in the day, 24 tracks, 32 Mitsus, Euphonics 48s, and now you're at Skywalker, which has probably secret, if we tell you we have to kill you technology, right? We'll probably have Mr. Lucas come by anytime now. How have you gone through all of this stuff? I know that when you expanded your scope of work, you said, I'm going to go take that class with Vicky Rose. You knew that you wanted to stay, to be able to communicate in their language, to learn that. So you went, okay, I'm going to go to UCLA and take that class. But at the level you're at right now at Skywalker, you are responsible for this space. It's not just learning the Neve 88R, which is beautiful, but it's really staying in front of the technology because you guys are pushing the envelope on so many things that you're doing. So how do you manage that?
Well, I just to clarify, I run the scoring stage. So I'm really kind of responsible for the technology that we use and making sure that everyone is up to speed on that. We have a very large technical engineering staff, that are just fantastic and really, when you think about it, Skywalker was created out of George's desire to do the things he needed to do for his movies. And so Skywalker has a culture of saying yes, and we'll figure out how to do it later. When you are
that kind of sounds a little bit like you too, because I think you have some of that attitude of we'll figure out how to do it.
It was for me a perfect fit because yes, as Michelle talked about, you realize what the challenges are and you just say, okay, this is what I have to do. And you don't say no, you just say yes. And you just figure out how to do it. Well, that's the culture at Skywalker. But for me, I have always, when I was starting out mixing PA, when I had my Model 10 Tascam console and my 4-track, my half-inch 4-track at home, having a home studio when I was in my 20s, I read. At that time, there was no Mix Magazine, no Post Sound News. There was Stereo Review and High Fidelity. And I found that some of the same terms were applicable in hi-fi and that home playback technology that were true in recording as well. Threshold, signal to noise, distortion, all of that kind of stuff. That's how I learned that, by applying those things to recording. And I've sort of never stopped. I guess I'm somewhat of a information geek, but I've never stopped reading about things. And, my best friend is a patch cable and a test tone, and trying to figure out signal flow and figuring out, how the dots connect. That has always been invaluable to me. There was a period of time where I decided I couldn't know everything and I didn't need to know everything. So
Right.
for instance, when I was working at Capitol, I guess it was, and MIDI was very popular, I just decided I could pay somebody to do MIDI. You know, I didn't have to learn that because it wasn't germane to me making records. I'm not a
Yeah.
composer. I'm not an artist. I'm not a keyboard player. I didn't need to know MIDI. And if I did, I would just hire somebody.
I think many of us want to pay somebody to do MIDI.
Yeah. So at some point, I think you just have to decide what your limit is and what you want to spend your time on, and concentrate on that. So,
You know, one of the things that you're well known for is the phrase, don't be afraid to raise your hand. And I love that phrase, for all of our listeners. When I teach a grad school seminar at Purdue University every other year. And, after 3 days of kind of putting information into their head, you have an afternoon of Q&A, whatever they want to talk about. And you're surprised that there is no questions. And I'm like, how is that possible? Okay, we just spent 3 days talking about complex system engineering topics, but you have no questions. Are you afraid to ask? Don't be afraid to ask.
Well, and that's why, we say there are no stupid questions, I mean,
right.
I used to, the first session I got as an assistant engineer at ABC, it was because the assistant engineer assigned to the project, the project changed its schedule and he did not live close by and couldn't rearrange his schedule. And they were looking for somebody to replace him, and I raised my hand. I had never been an assistant on a project before. ABC at that time was the first studio that had inline automation, and
Wow.
the consoles were still modular, so you had a fader and EQ, aux sends. It wasn't a channel strip. Everything had its own little place. And I remember spending all my time running to the tech shop. I kept telling the engineer I was assisting, excuse me, I have to go to the restroom, and I'd go to the tech shop and say, how do I do this? He wants to do that. And they must have thought I had a bladder infection or something, but,
Right.
And then I would just go back and I'd say, oh, push that button, and, but that's, fortunately for me, I had people all along my career that because I was asking questions and wanted to know more, they became invested in my success. If you don't do that, nobody's going to really care,
Yeah, I wonder, Michelle, one of the things that I found through my career is that the more knowledgeable engineers that I run into, they're very open, to sharing a lot of their knowledge. So I wonder, when you were getting started, were you also able to ask all questions, whether it was the shop you were working for in Philly or with Mark, or even when you started working on tour, when you have multiple engineers with different bands, was that one of your traits where there's a lot of kind of, let's just ask and figure out? Because I think you had a very inquisitive mind from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I was also lucky that I had, a lot of my colleagues were incredibly supportive, and I learned as much as I could from every situation I was in. And, one of the first jobs I had was in the AV department at this place called Church Street Station in Orlando, Florida. It was a big entertainment complex. I had a couple nightclubs and event centers, and, you ran everything from hooking up the VCR in the disco to running a Dixieland jazz show to a street party. And the guys that I worked with in the department were really, really great. And they actually kind of pushed me towards mixing, where I still, when I first wanted to go on tour, I wanted to be a keyboard tech. I was thinking along the lines of, well, I know pianos and keyboards, so I'll be a keyboard tech. And I didn't really want that hot seat of being the front of house mixer. But the guys that I worked with, they saw something in me that I didn't, and they kind of pushed me to, here, why don't you mix? Or they would, in one case in particular, one of them, he was mixing in the country western show, he asked me to come and just watch the console for a minute because he had to go to the bathroom. And little did I know that he just kind of took off and was in the rafters watching me mix the rest of the show while I was just like, oh, okay.
Wow. That's mean. That's mean.
I had the great support of people who knew that I could do it even before I did, who kind of pushed me in that direction. And I was also, there's a big thing about, when you're starting out and as a woman in this business, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder that you have to prove yourself, and you have to work harder and smarter than everybody, so there was some of that, but I also tempered it with, if someone who was more experienced than me knew that I was struggling with something and was willing to offer me assistance and advice, I was more than open to it. One of my very first shows that I mixed on my own, where I remember struggling with the EQ on the drums. Like, I didn't know what a kick drum was supposed to sound like. I mean, I'm messing around for what seemed like forever. And finally the house guy says to me, he's like, do you want a little help there? And I was like, yes, please. So he just said, try this, this, and this. And it was simple, but I would have never figured it out on my own. I would have just been twiddling for hours to come up with something that sounded terrible. So, there's a point of where you have to, be willing to accept people who are there to support you. And even recently, when I took over the job of mixing Styx from their longtime sound engineer, Gary Loizo, who's got, historical career in this business and amazing engineer. This was only going back not even 10 years ago. And the first 3 shows that I did were his last 3 shows. And Styx is a very, very busy show to mix. You have 2 lead guitar players, a lead keyboard, lead drums, and 3 lead singers. So you're mixing all night. There's no just turn it on, set it, and forget it. And Styx was also my favorite band growing up. So I knew their music inside and out. But just being able to work so closely with the guy who had done all their records, who had mixed all their shows since like 1995. And even though we both had different approaches, we both, had wanted the same result. And it was just being able to work that close with another engineer of such great, experience. Really, in 3 days, I felt my level of engineering had grown exponentially. Because it's very rare on tour that you get to work with peers, unless you're doing a festival, there's the headliner and the support act. And usually it's, a vast difference of years of experience. So I had not been in a situation where I had worked with someone with that much more experience than me, that closely for a long time. And it's just really amazing when you can learn from people. And just learn other techniques that, wow, I never thought about doing it like that. That's brilliant, because you get kind of stuck in your own head a lot of the time.
Absolutely. I think there's nothing more fun for those of us who mix to actually go and sit close to one of our icons that we want to observe how they go about mixing a particular project and go, wow, that's an interesting way to approach this, or the subgrouping, or the dynamics of this, or just the soundscape of how they lay out the panning of the mix, things like that. I always find that totally exciting. I wonder, Leslie, if you go through that also in your team of work. I've seen you work at the Grammys, so I will talk about that in 1 second. But I wonder if you get to still do that, where you get to collaborate with other peers and actually kind of trade back and forth and learn things from each other.
I don't as much as I would like. And one of the things I've been wanting to do is go watch an opera recording because I love opera. I've done a lot of live records, where I've set up guerrilla control room in the usher's closet, and made what ended up being some great records that way. But I've never done opera, and there are so many producers and engineers I admire who do that I would love to just be a fly on the wall. I did that when I happened to be in Oslo, Norway, and a good friend of mine, Morten Lindberg, who's a fantastic engineer, does wonderful immersive recordings. And so I ended up visiting him and watching how he set up and what his process was. And
I think it'd be difficult for you to be a fly on the wall on any session, just to say. But I think it's great that you're still always looking to ways to actually continue expanding your scope of knowledge and work. I think that's phenomenal.
Well, there's so many great recordings out there, so many people that I admire and that I look up to for what their talents are. They're doing things that I don't normally do. I mean,
Sure.
I'm lucky enough and people feel that way about me, but there are just certain types of records that people do that I don't do, and so to be able to learn kind of how they do that, what their mic choices are, what their thought process, all of that informs my work, whether I'm doing those kind of records or not. I mean, I think that's another thing that is similar about Michelle's and my background. It was interesting to say she grew up with an eclectic record collection. I mean, my father had records from Elvis Presley to Benny Goodman to Pres Prado to, Beethoven and Mozart. So, like Michelle, I grew up listening to all kinds of music. And I think that sort of informs how you think about music, and that you don't, you tend to be interested in all kinds of music.
Which probably later on, we're going to move into the mixing section, and it probably pays off because you've been listening to a lot of different styles of music all since your childhood, and I think that probably pays off when you get into mixing. So let's talk a little bit about mixing. Let me see if I can once again master our PowerPoint slides here. By the end of the presentation, I'll figure it out, I promise. So talk about self-education. So let's talk about mixing. Oops, you see, I tell you. So, the question that, 64,000 pennies question, how do you know when the mix is right? And then, Michelle, I'd love for you to talk to me about how do you prepare, when you're mixing a new touring client, how do you approach, because you have so many different things. And then Leslie, it'll be great to hear from you. We'll talk a little bit later on about what I've seen you do at the Grammys, which I think is phenomenal. But I also I'm curious as to your approach for a new project at Skywalker in general. So let's start with Michelle and see how do you know when the mix is right? How do you approach your mix, and how do you approach a new client?
Well, the first thing I do when I get hired is I get the artist catalog. And if, in like an instance like Elvis or Melissa Etheridge, who, have an enormous catalog, I will ask if there's a set list, or at least a list of songs that they're going to pull for the tour. And then I make a playlist and I just start listening, and I'll spend, months or weeks, however long I have before that tour starts, listening and dissecting the songs. I get out a legal pad and I make tons of notes, it'll start with intro, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, etc. And I'll break down each part of the song from, the hierarchy of the instruments to the tones of the instruments to effects, just as much detail as I can. Till it starts to just become ingrained when I hear the song and I see all those individual pieces. Then the next thing I do is have a conversation with the artist, and whether that's, pre-tour via email or a phone call, or once we get on the road, I just want to know, what do they want? What are their ideas about their sound? Some artists, make it sound like the record. Some artists just tell you make it sound good. It varies from each one. Some have very specific ideas of what they want, and some not so much. So that's a huge thing, because you need to know what they want, because that's, ultimately what I'm shooting for. And, so that's my first goal. And then when I'm mixing, the first thing I do is I kind of build, a solid foundation with the rhythm section and the vocals. And from there, I just kind of run through a mental checklist. I want to make sure that first you can hear the vocal and it's clear. Can I hear everything on stage? Is there something getting in the way of something else? A lot of times the snare drum and the vocal will be competing for the same space. Then, are the instruments, do they sound correct? Do they, is there anything in particular that doesn't sound right? Is the mix balanced? There's just I kind of take a step back and run through this little mental checklist. And, then I'll, dial things in a little bit and try and step back and put my audience ears on as opposed to my focused, engineer ears on, and do that as much as I can throughout the night. There's a lot of the acts I mix, they're very hands-on mixing. It's not, there's a difference between mixing and tweaking all night. So I rarely get to mix an artist that I can just turn it on, set it and forget it. I have a lot of cues, a lot of things that I need to be massaging all night. So I unfortunately, I also don't get to leave the console, which in certain venues, that's where I'll rely on my system tech to just take a walk and make sure, hey, what does it sound like over there? But it's more importantly, like I said, just get the artist vision, the front of house engineer is kind of the conduit from the band to the audience. It's your job to interpret what the band wants and make that come out of the speakers.
Very nice. Excellent. And so, I'm curious, do you always find that sometimes you have a committee at front of house that is giving you additional cues on how to make the mix better?
Yeah, it depends on I have throughout the years, some artists, especially when you first get hired, they'll be either, management or girlfriends, husbands, wives, friends of the band. Sometimes it's the musical director will have a lot of input, the creative director for the show, so it's all, you've got to kind of take it all with a grain of salt and understand ultimately who's at the top of the heap here that you really need to listen to. And you learn, I think by experience of how to very diplomatically, not brush people off, but let them know that you're especially when you get, you get husbands, wives, spouses of people in the band. They always want their person to be the loudest, just like every bass player wants the bass to be the loudest in the mix, and every drummer wants the drums to be the loudest. So, everybody's got an opinion. So you really have to learn how to very delicately deal with those situations. And that just comes from, years of experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
Paid your dues already. Leslie, obviously, you spent a lot of years, working, recording music itself, 5 Grammys, and, all of them are different categories. There's just vocal jazz records. You have classical chamber music, so some of them are for music, some of them are for engineering. And then you have also worked on several, film projects. So what's the process for you? How do you get into that headspace of, okay, this is a great mix? How do you know? What do you rely on?
Well, much like Michelle, talking to the artist, or in many cases the composer, about what their vision is, it really informs a lot of what I do. It informs the mic choices that I make. It informs how things are laid out in the room. That pre-production, pre-recording session conversation is extremely important. And so, at least I can start from the point of view where I'm trying to make things come out of the speakers in the way that the composer or the artist has always heard it in their heads. And if they, I learned that a lot when I started working with Kronos Quartet. Well, I should back up. When I started doing big bands at Capitol, and I was doing a lot of projects with Rosemary Clooney and Michael Feinstein, bands like that are written in a way for things to sound a certain way. And I love orchestration. I love how all those pieces are supposed to fit together. And again, I had a mentor, the guy he was a sax player, and he happened to contract the band. And he would say, when the sax and trumpet are supposed to be playing together, you really need to have the sax a little bit louder. And those kinds of things informed my ability to balance things. So now when I have conversations with composers and they say, well, there's a lot of brass and I want it to sound really powerful, but I don't want it to sound bright and bitey. Well, that informs the microphones I'm going to use. And
Sure.
so that informs how the sound is going to be. And because I love orchestration, I have a sense of how things are supposed to fit. And so hopefully when they walk in, they're hearing a balance that's 95% there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my recordings, particularly my classical recordings, don't get remixed at all. They are the balance that I have when I'm recording. And part of that is because the artist can come in and listen to their balance and judge whether this is the part that I really learned from working with Kronos. They're trying to figure out if they need to play louder or softer. Well, if I don't have the balance right, then they're overcompensating for something that is my fault.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to get the balance and the sounds, the sonic integrity of what they're doing to try and be as good as possible. So when they come in, they can judge how they're playing things, the texture of their bows, how loud they're blowing. And it's not because of something I've done. And they can judge it because it is something I've done, because I've been able to lay this groundwork for them that allows them to come in and really judge their performance. And when I'm recording, I'll raise a solo while I'm recording, because it's going to be louder anyway. So why not make it louder while I'm recording? Then I don't have to worry about it. The artist comes in, the solo happens, and it gets louder. I don't have to sit. I can go have a cup of coffee. That's my goal, actually, when I'm recording, that I can step away from the console, put the composer in my chair, sitting back and have them listen to things how they're supposed to sound. Do I get it 100%? No, but if I can get there 90% of the time, then that's my goal.
Do you ever, both of you actually, ever had a project when you were starting your careers? I remember for me, when I started mixing some orchestral things and some Broadway shows, sometimes I would get a mix going and then 20, 30 minutes into it, I just didn't like the mix and I just brought all the faders down and just started over. So did you ever at the beginning of your career had moments like that where you kind of went, let me just start over again on this mix?
Well, I think it's a little different for Michelle and I, because I don't think about it as a mix, because I always start by recording first. But geez, when I first started, working with bands and stuff and horn sections and just trying to figure out how to get everything to sound. And this was analog recording, and trying to figure out how to get everything to sound okay, and compressors and all of that, and who was supposed to be loudest, and how not to get competing, like Michelle was talking about, a vocal and a, snare drum, how to not get competing sounds. And sometimes I would just think, holy cow, I'm never going to get there,
Right.
But just, it comes with experience and there have been times where I have gotten other recordings from other people at other studios that I don't have the benefit of having done them myself, where, sometimes you just have to pull everything down and start over, or take a different approach.
Sure. Maybe change microphones, maybe change, the position of the mics or whatever. How did that go for you, Michelle? Did you ever have moments, in your beginning career where you have to kind of go, okay, let me redial this?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, but you can't really pull everything down and start over mid-show without everyone noticing. But yeah.
Yeah, no. I'm thinking of a sound check, or maybe you were just kind of practicing or something like that.
I mean, basically, you'll always have a bad night where it's whether it's the room or, whatever reason, it's just things are not sounding the way you want them to. And what I tend to do is I'll just start at one end of the desk, and solo up everything one at a time. And first try to figure out where's, something's off, where, and by soloing things up in the headphones, I'll be able to really tweak a little bit better. But I'll just start with like, all right, let's focus on drums. Are drums sounding okay? Great, that's good. Drums and bass, so they sit well together. You know, I just kind of break it down into components and try and isolate where the problem actually is, you know, while you're still mixing the show. And, you know, sometimes the room gets you and there's not much you can do other than damage control.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you played piano from an early age, even wanted to be a keyboard tech. Leslie, you had a guitar from 14 and you played on your own rock band. Are there any particular skills that you feel for our audience benefit would help somebody who's kind of developing their career? What are some of the skills that you think would help you go along to improve your mix? You know, I think obviously listening to a lot of music styles, I always tell my students, go and mix every type of music that you can go mix. You know, what are some of the things that you recommend?
Well, I think, you know, critical listening, like learning how to actually listen, not just hear music, but to, you know, understand what you're hearing, how to really pick things apart and recognize the different tonal characteristics of various instruments and just ear training, you know, really spending a lot of time focusing on listening and, you know, getting a feel for different styles of music, you know, what makes reggae sound different from, you know, pop, and what makes salsa sound different from heavy metal. You know, that every music has its own kind of style and characteristics. And if you're going to be mixing a different style, you need to, you know, you don't want to mix a jazz trio like you would mix a heavy metal band. So you've got to understand those differences.
Very nice.
Yeah. I teach, I don't teach often, but I do teach once a year at Institute for the Musical Arts in Western Massachusetts, which is a performance camp for girls, and we have a recording track. And one of the first things I do is I show a graph of a piano with all the different instruments that are in the frequency of the piano, so that the girls can start to think about what range those instruments occupy by using a piano as the focal point, so that they start to think about the fact that, you know, you have 5 saxophones, you know, they all cover a different range, and a tenor saxophone might be in the same range as an electric guitar. So, you know, you really just have to think about it in a different way. And I do think that critical listening is very important. I often listen to music that I would never buy, just because I'm always playing lots of CDs, you know, just to.
You know, it's interesting that neither of you who have used every piece of gear out there have mentioned that it's about the console, it's about the reverb, it's about this plugin, it's about this compressor. You have mentioned critical listening, you have mentioned different styles of music, you have mentioned having an understanding of music and tonality, you know, so it's not about the gear. So I'm curious for you to kind of talk about that for 1 second as to, you know, how is it that you never make it about the gear?
Well, the gear is important. You know, I've been a Neve girl almost my whole career, but I don't make the kind of records that a lot of people were making on SSL consoles. I'm not a mixer, you know. A lot of the techniques and things like that were developed using SSL consoles are just not the kind of music that I was doing. So I grew up using Neve, and, you know, my 88R is a fantastic console. It gives me exactly what I want in terms of the kind of music that I'm making. So it's not that the gear is not important, but it's like a microphone. It's a tool, you know. I don't, you know, there's certain mics I use all the time, but if they're not required, then I'll use something else. So it really is about the sound that I'm going for and how to get there, more than it is about the piece of equipment.
Yeah, and for me, you know, mixing starts long before you even get to the console. It's you know, starting with learning, knowing the music that you're mixing, knowing what you're going for, and then getting great sounds at the source. If you start with instruments like drums that aren't tuned, or have really worn heads, or a guitar rig that has a terrible tone, you can put all the plugins in the world on that, but it's not going to get better. It's still going to be garbage.
Sure.
It's the whole garbage in, garbage out. So it really starts with, start by just getting great sounds at the source, and communicating, and, then picking the right tools for the job, like the right microphones, miking things correctly. And if you understand the fundamentals, once you understand proper signal flow and gain structure, just by setting, by choosing, instruments that sound good and miking them correctly and getting good gain, you're 90% of the way there. A lot of things don't even need to be EQ'd, so it's all about the fundamentals. And granted, we all have our favorite gear and what we like to use, but in the real world, it's not very often that you get to choose exactly what you want, especially when you're starting out. I mean, when I started mixing in clubs, it was back in the days before even, long before line arrays or digital. And I'd walk into a club and there'd be a completely different set of components on one side of the stage than there were on the other. And nothing was wired correctly. So I'd be crawling around in the back trying to rewire crossovers and amplifiers just to get things to sound okay. And then having a desk where half the channels didn't work. Some of them were noisy. None of these inserts are patched right. So you're just kind of doing damage control. But when the fundamentals, you're going to have a better shot at making it sound good than someone who just doesn't know anything and is just, well, I have to have this piece of gear and this piece of gear and this piece of gear. And if that's the only stuff you can do, is the only way you can make something sound good is by using those specific pieces of gear, then there's something wrong somewhere. So
how would you know what microphone to put in front of a singer unless you've heard the way the singer sounds?
Right, and their mic technique.
And I think that part of that education for people who have the opportunity is to hang two mics. I mean, no matter what you're doing, if you're recording a drum set, put two different mics on the snare drum, and get an idea of what each one brings or doesn't bring to the party, and then that will inform you the next time you record drums, because we don't all have the benefit of recording like Michelle and I do now with people that already have great sounds,
right?
That from the source. And we both started out with bands and individual artists that didn't have great sounds. And so if you don't really have a good understanding of microphones and what could make something better, then you're gonna get stuck not being able to fix something, or you're just doing damage control.
I truly hope that our guests are taking notes, because these are like, we could put a book out with these recommendations. Continuing. Go ahead, Leslie.
I was just going to say, I learned that with soprano sax, which can be a very tough instrument to record because it has a tendency to sound a little nasally and harsh sounding. And so I started using ribbon mics on soprano sax. And that was a good lesson to me, that when I was working with vocalists that might have a bit of a bright kind of nasally sound, what a ribbon mic, how that would help them. And, that approach sort of translates. It doesn't really matter if it's not a soprano sax. It matters about how that sounded and how the microphone improved that. And then when I get that same sound again, no matter what it's from, then I can pick the mic that's going to help that,
Phenomenal. I want to continue talking a little bit about mixing, Leslie, tied into the topic of collaboration. I think probably many people know that you chaired, the Recording Academy Board of Trustees.
That's not true. I don't. I'm a past chair many years ago, but I think
in 2000, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you after Free Round One. So I think a lot of people know that you were involved with the Academy, I think a lot of people don't realize the amount of, number of years that you have been working actually at the Grammy show with a great team of people. So I'd like to say a big hello to our friends, Jeff Peterson and Ron Reeves. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about your work during the Grammy show. And I have had the opportunity and the great luck to be there with you a couple of times and watch you work. And to me, it's always amazing how you are able, for those of you who have not watched the Grammys, I don't know who hasn't watched the Grammys, but, when the Grammys, you probably have 20 different performances, all of them different music styles. Sometimes, it's not the way the CD was recorded because you have the artist singing with somebody else or a different arrangement. And to me, it was marvelous to watch you work when you are actually listening through the very few sound checks, or actually camera checks. And you're taking your notes, you have your notepad and you're writing some notes. Ron Reeves, masterful, music mixer, his mix is 95% in the pocket to begin with.
Yeah.
But your notes, your few notes, to Ron, that collaboration all of a sudden, makes the mix, all that better. And I always wonder, looking from the back, how does she know all of the different music styles? How does she go about it that, she goes through all of these different types of music and she always gets that mix, pretty right. So I'll be curious to hear you talk about that and what you do. What is your role at the Grammy show?
Well, I think my title is audio. I'm the Recording Academy audio advisor to House Sound, and the sound, of course, of the show and the live show at Staples and the broadcast is, needless to say, incredibly important to the Recording Academy. We do honor people for great musical performances. And so throughout all of the sound, we have someone like me. So for instance, I'm the audio advisor to House Sound. We have an audio advisor to the music trucks and an audio advisor to the final broadcast. So at every step of the way, there's someone there like me. And I just have, it's some of the most fun I have all year. First of all,
yes.
Michael Stewart and Jeff and Fletch and everybody at ATK is just fantastic. And Ron Reeves is, talk about speed mixing. I mean,
yes.
He is just wonderful to watch, and the fact that I get to sprinkle a little fairy dust on what he's done is an honor for me. But we really work really well together because, he's and a lot of the mixers for these acts, somebody like Michelle, for instance, if Elvis was on the show, Michelle would be there. And that she would come up and, Ron's worked with all these people all the time because he does all these shows. So he knows them, and now they all know me. And so they, of course, have their say. But I just listen. And then there are things that just musically, backgrounds need to be louder here. I'll be making notes about certain things where the artist is low in their register, where they need to be pushed up. Because you can't rely on compression for that kind of stuff. So I've got the script, I've got the lyrics, I'm making notes. And then by then, the band's mixer is in the truck. So, they've gone, and it's up to me and Ron now. Right. And so like the last run through, I'll be going through my notes and give them to Ron, and during the show I'll stand right next to him and give him cues, or he'll make notes on the screen of the Digico. And
it's frankly an amazing collaboration, between the two of you. It's almost like a dance. I've watched you now for a couple of years. You're tapping your pencil on your pad and taking notes, and I'm going, she's happy. And then, like you said, you sprinkle this fairy dust, and then the mix, you can sort of hear minute details that actually pull the mix, into a different level. And I think that's just remarkable. The fact that you have that capability.
when you were asking earlier, how do you know a mix is right? When I'm working on the Grammy show, during the show, if I'm moving my body and I'm kind of dancing and I'm not thinking about the mix, if I'm enjoying the way it sounds, the mix is right to me. I'm not,
and I recall seeing that a few times, so I'll make a note of that. The other part that it's interesting, and I had the great opportunity to collaborate with Jeff Peterson, who is one of the most talented system engineers in the business, and a mixer on his own right. He is responsible for tuning the sound system for the Grammys, which is no picnic. It's a rather complex, large-scale sound system in a cavernous arena when we're trying to deliver, the highest quality of audio in a basketball house. And so I always like his approach where he dials the system 80%. And then when Ron starts mixing, he continues adjusting things as Ron starts doing his first rough mixes. And then you and him also take a little bit of time to kind of go around, and you have that ear where you can walk around and go, okay, what about this area? What about this area? Just making sure that everything is really well balanced. I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit, because it's a different function from mixing.
Well, it is, and I must say again, I don't mix the show. My hands are never on the faders. Ron mixes the show, but yeah, I always joke with the guys now that I think they leave me Easter eggs just to see if I can still hear, because there's always something that I find,
Yes.
And sometimes it's because of where the subwoofers are placed, because the sound design is totally dependent on what the set design is. And
sure.
So things don't necessarily, the system is not necessarily hung the same every year. So I, walk around. I'm not looking for dead spots in the third tier of seats. I don't really care about that.
And Jeff has that all under control already.
That's all done. I don't need to do that. But there is a sonic profile that I'm looking for that I know is going to bite us in the end if we don't kind of fix that. So sometimes it's in the low mid range. Sometimes it's too much sub. It could be the crossover. Yeah, and so I'll come back and they fix it, and it just, I swear they're doing it on purpose to me. But,
No, I asked him that question last week, and he said, no, we don't, maybe for next year. Hopefully we'll be back next January and we can repeat it. I hope we can come back. Michelle, I'm kind of curious, you have gone through so many tours. Big hellos to system engineer and friend Ted Bible. Him and I had a little time to chat about your tour. Hi, Ted, with Gwen Stefani. I'm curious for you to talk to us about your collaboration, both ways. When you have a tour that is carrying PA and you have a system engineer that travels with you, and then vice versa, when you're globetrotting and it's just you, no system engineer, and you have to collaborate with the local company, system tech, what's your approach? How do you, we're talking about collaboration. How do you, go about this process?
Well, I'm very hands-on. If I'm touring with a PA, then I'll usually be involved from the start with designing the system with whatever sound company we're using for the tour. How many, what I want for the main hang, side hang, subs, front fill, etc. And once the system engineer is in place, we'll have a few conversations prior to the tour just to make sure that we're on the same page. Like how I want to drive the system. Usually my matrix feeds the left and right, and my subs are fed from left and right, that kind of thing. And I like to use a Dolby Lake LM44 for my system EQ. And everything will run through that. And then usually the system tech will want to use Smart or some sort of optimization software. But once we get out on the road, I rely on the system engineer to get the PA up every day, get it tuned, and get all the time alignment done, and make sure we have optimal coverage. And then once he does that, he basically hands it over to me to EQ. And at that point, I'll walk the room, and I'm still very old school. Like I don't use Smart or an RTA. I just basically have a list of songs that I play through the system that I know what they should sound like. And I'll put those on, walk the room, make sure everything is, is covered and all the levels are even. And just kind of take a little bit of time to acclimate to the new environment. Because every day, it could be some tours, it's all arenas, some tours, it's all sheds. Some tours, it might be a theater today, an arena tomorrow, a club the next day. So it's always, I spend a little bit of time just acclimating to the environment, hearing what's coming out of the room and what's coming out of the PA. And then I use the lake for EQing. Usually about a week in, my system tech will have a good idea of what I'm trying to get out of the PA and what I'm looking for. So they'll start to make a few more adjustments when they're tuning. And my last system tech on Elvis in March, we were in the UK, and Jonathan Brooks from Wigwam was amazing. And he made it his personal mission to have me not do any EQing every day. Like he really had it dialed in by probably the fourth show, like if I touched the EQ, he was just like, oh. But and that's what's great. Like when you have a system tech who can really get into your head, when you have that communication where you're on the same page, they know what you need from the PA and how to give it to you. And then during the show, I'll have them walk around the room for me as well, just to check the different zones, make sure nothing needs to be adjusted. Like I said, I usually can't leave the desk. And if you're mixing in theaters, it's, notoriously front of house is in a horrible position where it sounds, you're in the very back of the room under a balcony and it sounds completely different where you are than where everyone else is. So I will rely heavily on my system tech to walk and make sure that I'm not doing any major damage by compensating from where I'm at.
Sure.
If
Would
we're
you,
not,
yeah, go ahead.
if we're not carrying PA and if we're using local PA everywhere, what I try to do is advance as much as possible with the sound company that's providing the PA, just so that they know what I need and what I expect to see when I get there. And then again, I'll rely on them to get the system up and tuned, but I'll do more of any adjustments on my own, because that way I know what if it's somebody I've never worked with before, I'd rather do it on the EQ on the lake, get, any major adjustments that I need, because then I can always go back to, if I need to make a change during the show or once the audience comes in and the system tech's nowhere to be found, I know I can just do it because it's right there on my system as opposed to somewhere in their processing.
Yeah, so ultimately you're controlling the sound of the system so that when you're listening to your playback, that, if it sounds correct with your playback list, that your mix is going to translate correctly.
Right.
So that's an important point. Are there, for both of you, are there any particular interpersonal skills when you're collaborating, with this team, not just with your system engineer, maybe with your, stage patch person, with your audio crew, or, even not just at the Grammys, Leslie, but, with any of your teams at work? What are some of the interpersonal, not technical skills that you think are very important for our listeners that they need to bring to the table? This is not just about having the technical chops, but there are some interpersonal skills that can make or break your career.
Well, Michelle mentioned earlier how she deals with, people that come back to the console that, don't know anything other than they think that their girlfriend or boyfriend should be louder. At the Grammy show, as I said, we're dealing with mixers that spend their lives with these artists. So, their opinion has to matter. At the same time, they're one of 20 acts on the show. So, everybody wants to be louder, but in that show, I sort of treat that show like producing a record where there's an arc to the sound from beginning to end.
Right.
You have this huge act that always opens the show, and then you have all these moments in the middle, and then some big finale. And so for me, it really is like producing a record where the continuity has to be there in terms of sound and all of that. So I think the interpersonal skills of dealing with a house mixers that travel with the band are important. For my recording sessions, we always just have fun. I'm always cracking jokes. I mean, not, just things are stressful enough making records. Whether the artists have to fundraise to make their records, maybe somebody had to take out a second mortgage on their home. maybe this is their last record with a label and they are worried about what they're going to do, for their next record. Who knows, what their struggles were getting to the point where they walk into Skywalker and they're recording music. So I think part of our interpersonal skill is, first of all, treating everybody with respect. I think that came from growing up with my father and mother and my dad's band and being surrounded by great musicians, where you have to treat everybody. It's not my record, it's their record. And my job is to make them sound great. And so I think that the interpersonal skill for me that's most important is having respect for the people you work with and you're working for. And everything comes from there.
Fantastic. Michelle, I think there's also a little bit of trust involved in there, right? When you have a system engineer or your teamwork,
Yeah. Well, I like to second the Leslie said there about it's not our music, it's their music. That's a big thing that some engineers tend to forget. When they get hired to mix a band, it's not your music. It's up to them ultimately. What their vision is for their music, and we're just an extension of that. But on tour, a big part of a skill set is being nice. Being someone people want to work with. You can be great at your job. You can be the most amazing engineer on the planet or the most amazing drum tech or whatever. But if you're toxic and negative and someone that no one wants to be around, you're not going to work, because no one's going to want to live with you. And so you just got to be somebody that people want to work with, just have a good attitude, and be an adult, because there's, your mom's not out here to pick up after you. So a lot of people start out on tour, quite young, and you realize quickly that you're living on a bus with up to 11 other people, and they don't want to clean up your stuff. So we're all on the same team. Everyone's working for, the same goal of having a great show. So teamwork is a huge thing, being able to work well with others and be conscientious of the other people in the other departments on the tour, especially when you're doing like a big arena tour like Gwen. We've got video, motion control, lighting, carpentry, audio. Everybody's got to be conscious and aware of what they're doing and how it affects everyone else outside of your department. When you're putting your cases here and that's where lighting Dimmer Beach has to go, you're just slowing them down, and just being conscientious and communication, having the skills to be able to communicate what you need with people in a diplomatic way, and like also, when you're on the other side of that, knowing how to not take things personally, having a thick skin. And if someone tells you, or someone happens to snap at you because they're stressed or whatever reason, just do what they need. Don't take it personally. It's usually not a reflection on you. It's just the heat of the moment and whatever. But, if someone tells you to do something different, it's just because that's what they need from you. So you've got to be able to communicate with people.
Phenomenal. I really hope people are taking notes. We're into our last section before we go to Q&A, which is a short brief. You both have had a lengthy career, a successful career, and you still find time to pay it forward. So I'd be curious to have you talk for a minute about your thoughts about the importance of mentoring up and coming engineers. I know you both do it, so I would like you to speak a little bit to that.
Well, yeah, I think probably for Michelle and I, there was nobody that looked like us doing what we were doing. And so it's been really important to me to be able to, pass that along. And whether it's the, recording program that I teach at IMA, or the, the scholarship for Ethel Gabriel through Sound Girls, or the stuff I do for WHAM. It's really all about being able to, and it's not just young women in the either. I mean, I find it's important to be out there as much as I can, because I think it's important for men to see women as role models as well. And so yeah, it's been very important to me. And I think also part of my involvement with the Recording Academy has been about that as well.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, and the same for me. Like I've been an ongoing mentor for Sound Girls and also students at Full Sail, and talking at other universities, which I love being able to help people who want to do what I do. You know, just I knew when I started out how I had no idea how to get into this business, and I struggled to find my way. It was a lot of twists and turns, and if I can make someone else's journey into this business a little bit easier or more direct, I'm happy to do that. And also, Sound Girls came about from Carrie Kais and myself. When we both started doing live sound in the 80s, there were so few women, and she was possibly the only other woman that I had heard of, and likewise for her. But it took us over 20 years to actually meet face to face. And that was when we spoke on a panel at AES in 2012. And it was just such a great experience, was all these women engineers that we were both inspired to in different ways from that experience, to just take it and pay it forward, and reach out to build a community of women in audio that support each other, and also support the next generation of women who want to get started. And also through Mixing Music Live, which is a program I started last year. I have got 2 online courses that from years of talking to aspiring engineers and how overwhelmed they are with how much there is to learn. I find a lot of them go about it backwards. They want to learn every individual piece of gear, when what they really just need to learn are the fundamentals, which will then allow them to work every piece of gear. So oddly enough, we've covered a lot of the things that I teach in the course in this webinar, all those fundamentals, which when you have a good background in that, and I think that gets lost on a lot of people who it's great that everyone can buy Pro Tools or Logic and kind of teach themselves, but you don't know what you don't know when you're just starting out. So I love being able to help young people who are struggling with, well, I know this board, but I'm terrified to run that one because I don't know how it works. And here's what you need to learn, and this is going to help you through that. And it just really makes me happy when I see someone, when they start to get it and they really light up, like, oh, this isn't really as difficult as I thought it was. So I really love mentoring and helping people get started.
Fantastic. And I must say, Michelle, you and I have spoken quite a bit about Mixing Music Live, your program, excellent chapters, highly recommended, and your book, which I already read, so it's something that I think it's well worth it for anybody at any level. Even if you have been in the audio industry for a number of years, it's still worth it to actually go back and look at some refreshing points in there. So I highly encourage people to go and take a look at Mixing Music Live. Leslie, could you touch a little bit on the scholarship that was implemented at Sound Girls for Ethel Gabriel? Is there any information we can share about that?
Sure. Ethel is someone who I knew nothing about, actually, until a couple of years ago when Sound Girls approached me about speaking on camera about Ethel, because there's a documentary being done about her. Mm-hmm. Ethel was probably the first woman A&R, artist and repertoire person at a major label, responsible for Henry Mancini records, all kinds of different artists. And ironically, put together some of the best of collections of my father's, because he recorded for RCA and she was with RCA Records. So I knew nothing about her, read a lot about her, and did the thing. And then I was going to be speaking in the same city that Ethel was in, and I arranged to meet with her in person. And,
Wow.
and that was just fantastic. You know, she's in a senior living home, and but it felt a little like a pilgrimage to me. You know, once I learned about her, it really felt like, God, if I was there and I didn't go see her, it would be really terrible. So I went and I met her, and you know, she's kind of a star there because people are always coming to visit her. And so I got a notice about Sound Girls doing scholarships, and I thought, well, you know, I've never done this before, but you know, I'm funding a scholarship in Ethel's name.
That's amazing. I encourage everybody to go to the website at soundgirls.org and check it out. I think Ethel, you know, 40 plus years at RCA, over 2,500, you know, productions, you know, massive career. And so I think this is a great way for you to pay it forward. Really impressive. You know, it's kind of interesting. We never have sessions that go this long, and we still have over 100 people online, which it's amazing to me. And we have like 20 questions, 20 plus questions. So let's see if we can actually plug to some of these questions here. So I thank you so much for sticking around. All right, so first question says, I'm an engineer graduating and a trained classical pianist. What is the importance of getting an audio engineering degree? What is the best way to establish credibility in the industry and start getting work? It's a complex question.
Well, I think it depends on what their goal is to start with.
Right.
Yeah, it
Probably,
doesn't,
you know, yeah.
It doesn't really say in the question what the goal is. If your goal is to be an
audio engineer or a musician.
Yeah, I mean, then if you're a trained classical pianist, do you want to be a recording engineer in primarily classical music, or not? You know, I think the idea of establishing credibility is a bit of an odd one, but you know, I think that probably the best thing to do is just you know, try and if you're going to work on recording, that's one thing. I would say, as a classical pianist, you know, you might know a lot of other musicians. Mm-hmm. And so I would, you know, first thing I would do is talk to them about recording them, getting experience that way. You know, a lot of what we do is personal relationships, mm-hmm. where you start working with a composer or an artist, and you form a relationship, and then, you know, that becomes kind of your ongoing relationship for the rest of your career. So I think it's important to find those people, mm-hmm. and that way also you can learn a lot by doing that.
Fantastic. All right, next question from Kim Smith. Would you consider your career to be traditional male dominated? I think we know the answer to that. But I think on the other hand, it's a lot of changes are going on. So I don't know if you want to talk to that.
Well, I mean, I think it's obviously women are the minority in audio, but to me, I've never been on a mission to recruit more women into audio. I've just been more at anybody who wants to enter this field. I'd like to help make it easier. Because I know for me, like when I started out, I had no support, and it was really difficult to figure out how to get going. But it's not typically something, from my end at least, on the road, on touring, it's not typically something that a lot of women would want to do. I mean, my girlfriends all think I have the coolest job in the world, but they would be like, I could never do that. You know, you're living on a bus, you know, out of a suitcase 200 and some days a year, and away from home, and sometimes in really horrendous conditions that you're working. And it's physical and dirty and hard a lot of the time. And your days are 16 to 18 hours long. And that's not, you know, something that a lot of people, men or women, would choose to do. So it's definitely, you've got to have a drive and a real desire to want to do it, just to get into it, to get started.
Absolutely. All right, Les? Okay. Let's see. From Gemma Stack. When you're working as a freelancer in post-production, is it better to be a multi-skiller or to be really good in a specific area? For example, editor, sound effects editor, re-recording mixer. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, I think that there's, I don't, I don't work on the post side other than scoring music for film. But I think, what I've seen is that there's this kind of natural trajectory for that. And eventually people do build up skills that have them be a great dialogue effects editor or a great sound effects editor or a sound supervisor, Foley editor. And so, but it's all editing. So if you're a great editor, you could get started in any one of those and eventually find out what you like the best and what you can do the best. There is a lot of course multitasking going on now because everybody is you have. People used to be just dubbing mixers. They would be the final mixers for a film. And then, of course, through Star Wars, among other things, people were sound designers and mixers. So now they're both. And people are doing editing, all of that. On smaller films, sometimes there's only one person doing all of that. So, I think once you get a sense of what all those jobs are, then you can figure out the right path.
Copy that. So a couple of questions from Matt Crawford. I think they're mostly to you, Leslie, but see how it goes. If you were at the beginning of your career now, looking to go into audio post-production, what would you do in regards to self-education, networking, in order to progress into a full-time position? And then second, in relation to that, what skills of technologies would you advise for junior sound editors like myself to study?
Well, for better or for worse, Pro Tools is ubiquitous.
Yeah.
So it would be really, that would be the most important thing. I think it would be important to, try and work on a film and replace the whole soundtrack, see what you could do with that in terms of editing. I think networking is important to a point, join your local AES chapter. If you're still in school and your school has a Grammy-U program, join the Grammy-U program. All of that networking is very important. It, and who knows if a job will come out of it. But I think that self-education is very important.
It seems the topic of post is very popular with this crowd. We have a question from Eric Chauncey. What advice would you have for someone in their 40s looking to migrate from live sound into post?
I'll take that advice too.
Yeah, please. We want to know, Leslie. Let us know.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I have any advice for that. Post is traditionally a union job. So in many cases, it's IATSE. So if you were going to go from live sound and you have mixing experience, that's a little different because there are very few mixing jobs in post. Post is a lot of production sound. It's a lot of sound effects editing. There's a lot of other work that goes into that besides mixing. But I would, certainly think about going to your local IA office and see if they have any training programs for you.
Yeah. For example, like the question from Avery Brooks, I'm currently attending SAE Expression College, getting a bachelor's in applied science in audio, but I still feel like I know nothing about the craft, but I love it.
I don't know anything about craft either. So
what is right? What is the best way to expand my knowledge so I would be able to feel more comfortable going for any internships or looking for work? I think Michelle. I don't know if you want to attack that one.
Yeah, I would try to find, somewhere local that you can actually get some hands-on experience. Whether you want to go into live sound, find a local sound company, or even an event center somewhere that has a lot of live events, even if it's just conferences where you can, work with some of the gear. A local studio, sometimes TV stations or radio stations will take interns, and just some you can start dabbling in it and get any job that you can in audio. Because then you'll start to get a feel for what you're actually learning. It's definitely something that you need to practice. The fundamentals that you learn, you need to put into practice for them to really sink in, so you'll understand them.
Fabulous. Okay, we have a couple of questions from Hema Stack. I think these are more related to Leslie. So when you get given a new project at Skywalker, do you get asked to come into any pre-production meetings, which we did talk about, and get a brief? And during that time, do you start planning your Pro Tools templates or start planning recording any atmoses and specific sound effects, or do you have templates that are already organized?
Well, we had talked about the fact that I usually initiate the pre-production contact with the composer or the artist. Usually when you're working at a studio, the studio has a template for how they want to lay things out on the console. So I have a particular way that I like things laid out on the console. So the template reflects that. So even if we're getting a build session in from a composer, for instance, who has pre-recorded percussion or a click, other things like that people are going to want to hear. We just import that into the template that we have, and then that spits out to the console the way I want it laid out. All that's a part of the setup that we do. I don't deal with sound effects at all, although when I'm scoring a film, of course, there is a part of the prelays we have available to us are a temp sound effects track, temp dialogue track, so that we can always put those in to make sure that the music isn't interfering with any of those. So that is available to us. You just have to try and think ahead to what somebody might want to hear and make sure that you have that prepared. An example would be if somebody sends you a session that has quarter note clicks, you might want to create an eighth note click along with it, because there are times when an eighth note click is more beneficial to the musicians rhythmically than a quarter note click is. So you just prepare to have that so that you're ready for it. You might never need it, but it's going to take you time away from the session if you have to create it. So, why not just do it in the beginning?
Absolutely. I know that we're running out of time, and I apologize for many people who have submitted a few questions that we're not going to get to. Remember that this session will be posted. I would like to ask one final question from one of our guests, which is, what is still challenging for both of you at this point in time in your careers? What is challenging? And obviously we're in very particular times, but
well, for me, yeah, it's I'm finding myself getting more and more choosy of what I'm willing to leave home to do.
Sure.
After this long in the business, I tend to like to mix artists' music that I like or that's inspiring, and it's getting harder and harder to find a lot of those artists. Not that new music isn't good, but it's just I don't tour the way new young bands starting out. I don't do that kind of touring anymore. So it's getting difficult to find artists and music that I really choose to work with. So at this point in my career, yeah, just finding the motivation to keep interested.
Yeah, absolutely. What about for you, Leslie?
Well, I still find I raise my hand, and I tend to. I really enjoy some of the more challenging people that I work with. And when I say challenging, I don't mean challenging in a bad way. I mean challenging in a good way, where they will come up with just bizarre ideas. And then for some reason they call me and ask me if I want to do them. And invariably I say yes. And, you know, speaking to the point the person made about, you know, not feeling like they know their craft, I go into these things going, how the hell am I going to do this? You know? But fortunately, having a long career, I know I'm going to figure it out, but the challenging part is trying to do what it is they want. And I enjoy that challenge. It doesn't, it certainly has me sort of going, how the heck am I going to do this? But it doesn't, I'm not fearful of it. I kind of, I welcome it. And particularly because the people that are making those calls to me, I really enjoy working with, and I enjoy them because they come up with these pie in the sky ideas that really make me think long and hard about how I can make it happen for them.
Phenomenal. Again, thank you so much. I'm going to put up your contact information if I can, again, master the art of PowerPoint. Again, thank you so much. And Michelle, thank you so much for, you were the key person to help me put this together. You know, for those of you who visit the soundgirls.org website, you'll find that Michelle wrote the bio for Leslie. And it was during our conversation about that this session was born. And I really appreciate you sticking with it and being my partner on this whole thing. So thank you, Leslie. It's always a great honor to get to spend time with you. I hope that all three of us get to see each other and that we can actually get together at the Grammys 2021. So much health to all of you. Mallory, if you're there, please take us home.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle and Leslie. It was great to hear about your guys' careers. Excuse me, and thank you for everyone that joined. Just a reminder that this is recorded and it will be on our YouTube channels a couple days following this session. Again, thank you everyone and have a great afternoon.
Thank you guys.
Bye.